Hey YouTube, Joeboy here. So, One Piece chapter 1150 is out. If you guys haven't checked out that chapter yet, I suggest that you do so because I will be spoiling you. But now that you have, let's begin. I feel like it's kind of strange to say this given that we had the Gods Knights pretty much whooping up on everyone before now. But boy, things have escalated quickly. I mean, like, damn. Honestly, after the last chapter, I was a little bit in shock, and I wasn't entirely sure what to think. We knew that Imu was possessing Gunko, but were we actually about to fight this man? In Elbaph? Right now? Is that really what Oda was about to do? Verse Imu? Right now? In Elbaph? Turns out the answer to that question is yes. Honestly, I still kind of don't believe. We're all literally dreaming or having a nightmare right now. Sometimes I say, nobody predicted this, and, you know, like secretly, I know that it's probably not true. Like, somebody out there guessed it. Somebody. And by guessed it, I mean they didn't just say it, but there's like an actual rationale which could have justified it. But essentially fighting Imu right now in Elbaph? Nope, don't think so. And because I didn't talk about it in the last review, I'm contemplating just making this a standalone video. But I mean, like, I feel like you can discuss this happening by itself for a really long time. It's pretty well established that Imu doesn't really do anything. They use their subordinates, making Imu similar to Gecko Moria and a little bit of Big Mom. I don't want to call Mu lazy, you know, but like it just seems like action and doing things is beneath him. Really, the only thing that we know that they've done before now is operate the weapon which destroyed Lolosia. But in my mind, I always thought of it like, well, Mu's the only one who can really use this weapon. Plus, would they really want anyone else to operate it? Just seems like a card that they would reserve for themselves. And is this really Mu doing anything using a weapon from afar? Or just a different form of a subordinate? I suppose if I make that argument, then it also invalidates possessing Gunko. I guess what I'm trying to say is like, very few times in the story do I really feel like Mu is actively engaged, which makes him seem kind of desperate. What is happening in Elbaph right now, I guess, matters a lot. And for some absurd reason, Mu's mind seems to be here while Mary Joie is literally on fire. You're choosing to aggro Elbaph when literally your home base is in danger? And if you can conquer the giants so easily, one, why aren't you doing that in Mary Joie? And two, why haven't you already done it to Elbaph at any point over the last 800 years? Honestly, aside from the impression that Imu is one of the final antagonists of the series, this is why I feel like it's impossible to rationalize beforehand Imu being here, because we simply do not possess enough knowledge for it to make sense. But I want to make sure that I'm clear. I am not complaining. Oh boy, am I not complaining. To borrow a very old and tired joke, right? You want to look up not complaining in the dictionary to be a picture of Imu possessing Gunko in her devil form. I guess not complaining is not actually a word. We'll call it orgasm instead, because this chapter was spectacular. By the time that we get to the end of all of this, I really do trust Oda enough that this will all make complete sense. We just need to better understand the exact circumstances in Elbaph, Imu's personality, and potentially limits on their abilities. But earlier I was trying to say, I'm not sure that I actually said, but I was trying to say that in the last chapter review, we didn't really talk about the attack or whatever is going on in Mary Joie. I think that I'm going to make a standalone video about that, kind of break it down with some cool ideas. But just to give you guys something, I kind of think that Mu does not care about Mary Joie at all. I feel as though the only reason that Imu was there to begin with is because of the whole facade that the world government was trying to create. That and perhaps a tree of devil fruit, if that exists. But let's ignore that possibility for a second. Aside from that, there's really nothing special about Mary Joie, aside from this is where the world government decided to be 800 years ago. Yes, it's located on the Red Line, but there's a lot of Red Line to go around the world. I've also played enough Civilization to know that being central also means that you are literally surrounded by all of your enemies. It is not necessarily the best place to set up a defense. Really, its power comes from the symbol that it is. And I think that you and I both know that the reputation of the world government is soon to shatter into little tiny pieces. To go full on Will Ferrell, right? Like Imu has literally been sitting on a throne of lies. As we kind of learned from Gunko recently, the entire plan really is to destroy the world, and that has been the plan for a while. Meaning Emu does not need to protect the previous established order. They are planning to rule by force regardless. So the throne of lies does not need to be preserved if you're literally the strongest and defeat all of your enemies. If might is right, you simply need to be the mightiest. That appears to be the plan. So I suppose one of the thoughts that I've been having is that Emu is not intending on saving Mary Joie, expects it to fall, and perhaps even wants it to fall. That could potentially solve a celestial dragon problem that's been itching at them for 800 years. The kingdom Emu actually wants to rule over is Elbaph. And it's possible that Emu alluded to this at the end of this chapter. They are not looking to destroy Elbaph. This land is to be ruled. The tree is a lot like the Red Line, but far more majestic. There may be some unknown aspects and elements to this island we're not yet aware of. I'm thinking about Louis Arnott's warning. Even looking at the prophecy mural, the tree is at the center. And there's also a kingly character in the mural that many associate with Emu that seems to be visiting the tree. I also think that the island is far more defensible than the Red Line because you're in the middle of the New World, where the weather has decided to level up quite a bit. But yeah, maybe the simplest thing that I can say is that so far Elbaph has been presented as a kind of paradise, the Garden of Eden. If there's a place in this world that Emu believes is fitting for them to rule, my guess would be Elbaph. And I guess if you want to compare Elbaph to the Garden of Eden, which I like to do because we first met the giants in a place called Little Garden, another place with giant creatures and plants, then you could potentially start connecting the island to the devil, and potentially the fruit of the devil. Are you guys seeing what Oda could be cooking up here? The Garden of Eden. The story of Adam and Eve. The devil tempted them to eat the fruit. So if you're convinced that the tree of the devil is one reason why Emu must protect Mary Joie, there's at least some chance that this could also be related to Treasure Tree Adam. So while Mary Joie is under attack, Emu's actual plan may be to conquer Elbaph and relocate. Although it appears as if things are getting pretty hectic, so time is of the essence. Honestly, I think that this explains just about everything. The only thing that we really don't know is why didn't Emu do this sooner? And I feel like it makes enough sense that it just wasn't time yet. But yeah, let's not get too far ahead of ourselves. Let's go back to the beginning of the chapter and tackle this play by play. So at the beginning of this chapter, the giant warriors led by Dory and Brogy finally arrived to where the children were being held hostage. From the last chapter, we already knew that Gunko was now Emu. To me, it makes sense that Emu could sense that Gunko was regaining her memories, and they knew that this would result in, at the very least, a great delay. This forced Emu to possess her, where I assume even if Emu unpossesses her, that he would regain some amount of control back over her. But while here, I guess Emu thought, let's speed things up. Maybe you can already tell, but full disclosure, I do not think that Emu is going to stay here for the duration of the arc. I think that Emu's abilities have some limitations. We'll discuss this more in a moment. So the giants see Gunko, Mu floating and attempt to quietly take the children away. And then Mu blasts them with Conqueror's Haki. As a side note, this is something that we know that Luffy could sense in the past, even at great distances. Shanks and Wano comes to mind. So I presume that Luffy and group are probably on their way. He should now be officially aware that shit is going down. The Haki Blast ends up taking down a lot of giants, but obviously not Dory and Brogy. Oda also interestingly pans to Elder Jarl, who has a look about him that suggests to me that he might know something of what is happening. We'll come back to this later as well. So the next thing that happens is actually, to me, not to really anybody else, but to me kind of interesting and perhaps telling. Mu then starts clowning Killingham. Is this all your nightmares, God? And Killingham is pretty quick to say, not at all, my lord. There are still many nightmare fissures left open. These monsters were born from the nightmares of this island. They are creatures made from dreams with no concept of death. I can revive them at any time. I just need to give them the signal. Based on this chapter, you don't really get the impression that Emu needs anybody else to seriously take care of business, right? This dialogue between Mu and Killingham suggests otherwise. Mu needs Killingham's nightmares. I want you to keep that in your back pocket. But while we're here, right, Killingham says that their nightmares are literally made from dreams, and dreams have no concept of death. Something like this makes me think about Luffy, because it's pretty easy to speculate that Nika's powers also relate to dreams, or imagination or desires. Of course, right now, this is Luffy's own imagination. Using his imagination, he can do anything, and he can bring some things into existence. So I'm over here legitimately wondering if Luffy might be able to do something more similar to what Killingham is doing. I'm also kind of wondering whether or not Nika is an entity made of dreams. Therefore, while transformed, Luffy cannot die, because the concept of death does not exist. Going back to Wano, Luffy was dead, then his fruit awakened, then his heart restarted. Potentially worth pointing out. I'm also over here wondering, at least a little bit, why Killingham did not already revive all of the nightmares that are essentially pretending to be dead. Could Killingham be more similar to Gunko than we realize? And a forgotten part inside of him is attempting to rebel against Imu. Imu then commands Summers to continue with the children. And again, at this point, I'm wondering out loud to myself, and I guess to you, why does it matter? Why do the children matter so much? The scene itself implies that Mu still needs them. And a little bit later, Summers comments on this. It is imperative that we establish a suitable authority, one capable of striking a proper ransom for those adolescents. What I think that this tells you is that Mu requires a king of this land to strike a deal with him. In my opinion, this seems related to Mu's abilities, and is potentially a clue to some of its limits, and/or criteria required in order to access even greater powers. So Summers continues this time out loud. It's as you say, my lord. What do you do with a country that has no king? And so Mu looks at Dory and Brogy and commands them. I command thee to claim dominion of this island. Henceforth, ye shall reign as the kings of Elbaph. Suddenly, Luffy's line from all the way back in Sabaody about not wanting to rule over anything but just wanting to be the freest suddenly takes on a different meaning. This potentially exempts Luffy from making some kind of deal with Imu. Despite his flag being raised over islands like many of the other Yonko, he's not the ruler of these islands. He's not their king. He has not conquered them. He specifically leaves the people of these islands free. They can govern themselves however they want to. At the very least, this establishes, at least in one very obvious way, how Luffy's double fruit and Imu's abilities are polar opposite. Luffy's powers are related to freedom, and Mu's powers have some aspect of rule and authority. If you recall from the very beginning, the first thing that Mu did was claim dominion. Maybe it wasn't yet over the entire country of Elbaph, but this seems to activate their powers. So then from this, we get some of the coolest scenes in all of One Piece, in my opinion. Brogy, bless his heart, grabs Imu. So Imu summons a grimoire, which when opened has like fire and shadow leaking from the pages. Then the darkness seems to coalesce into legitimate objects, a knife and a huge gun. Imu uses the knife to stab Brogy's hand, releasing him, and then takes the gun and literally blows off his hand. Once again, this reminds me a lot of Luffy's powers. Don't get me wrong, I love Blackbeard, and to this day, I still think that Blackbeard is the final antagonist of One Piece. Just my opinion. But at this point, Imu's powers, devil fruit, whatever it may be, is way more a foil to Nika than anything Blackbeard does. If Luffy is made out of freedom or dreams or whatever, he molds things out of this. We've seen this before. For instance, he created goggles for himself. Mu appears to be doing something similar, but instead this is being molded out of, it appears, darkness or shadow. Anyway, Mu says this. Listen, Brogy, go and meet with Mountain Beard Jarl. You shall take his head and raise it up high. Then proclaim to the people of this island, we are the kings of Elbaph, and this is in quotes. This phrasing appears to be important. Thou shalt cast aside thy lifespan for a body unyielding to death. Under Mu's dominion, thou shalt be granted unprecedented strength. No longer shall thou be bound by reason nor by common sense. Becoming a demon is truly the pinnacle of existence. And then we get this attack. Demonic contract. Domi reversi, which is Latin for returning home or returning to one's origin. Brogy then sinks into a pit of flames. Then Emu flips their hand, and Brogy flips upside down, his bottom half now cast in shadow. He rises from the pit, and he is now a demon. Straight up, except for the wings, he looks almost exactly like an ancient giant. He's now bigger and has the horns that are associated with ancient giant blood. One of the first things that he says, kind of like Luffy in Nika form, I feel like I can do anything. Then Mu does the same with Dory and a bunch of other giants. We now have an army of demon giants. So okay, where do we even start? This chapter was a pretty big win theory-wise, and I honestly think that it confirms many of the things that we have been talking about recently. First things first, Emu is officially the devil. I can't completely claim this theory because I think that there was quite a lot of people that speculated this after Sabo encountered Emu and the Gorosei in Marijois. But at the very least, the video that we made literally that same week aged pretty well. And honestly, it was one of those ideas that once you heard it and you started thinking about it, you're like, yeah, okay, this is probably the case. Very rarely do I upload something and you don't get a lot of comments saying, nah, I disagree. So it felt like from that point onwards, this just became a community theory. But to all the theory haters and naysayers out there, that in no way took away from this reveal. At least not for me. You know, sometimes I say that Oda shouldn't read One Piece theories and shouldn't be influenced by them in any way. And I say that and I believe that. But I also, in the back of my mind, know that that isn't entirely like what it should be. As an author of an insanely popular story, you are never, ever, and you should never stop your fans from discussing your work. So if they do figure something out, it does kind of change how they would interact with the story. One of the reasons why I think that this reveal still worked so incredibly well, despite the fact that I think that anybody who is part of the community believed that Emu was the devil, is because Oda didn't drag it out. In my opinion, sometimes really milking a reveal is the right call, but only if the fans are still guessing. If fans think that they already know and you milk it and you add more and more details which just confirm what they feel like they already know, then you take away from the impact of that reveal. So in this case, sometimes it's better just to dive in. The fans have figured it out. No more clues, here's the answer. Then you're not suspended in this awkward state of a partial reveal. So I'm not going to go so far as to say that Oda is introducing Emu and Elbaph in part because of fan theories. I honestly do not believe that. But regardless of the intentionality behind it, this was the perfect time to drop this. And for me, it hit like a truck. We also speculated literally last week that if Emu was the devil, then a power that it just makes sense for Emu to have that is present in all stories related to the devil pretty much is a contract with the devil. Another theory which has aged extremely well. If you haven't watched this one, I highly recommend that you do. I'll link it in the description. Worth a watch. Say a lot of things there that I'm not going to justify the same in this review, but yeah, hit the nail on the head with this one. When you typically make a contract with the devil, the price tends to be your soul. And we know that in the story of One Piece, the soul is often referred to as lifespan. So in, I would say, a very surprising way, that happened in this chapter. Emu makes a contract with Dory and Brogy, gives them immense strength, and the price is their lifespan, or their soul. The reason, though, that I'm saying that this reveal is still somewhat surprising is because typically the way that it works is that you have to willingly make a deal with the devil. You could think Baldur's Gate, right? But the devil attempts to manipulate you to get you to agree to give them your soul. Most often this is required, which doesn't appear to be happening in the chapter. Emu is forcing this contract. Dory and Brogy agreed to nothing. So this is possibly just wishful thinking on my part because I'm trapped in time to where my mind was a few weeks ago. But I like the thought that there's different levels of this deal. This attack also has a colon. It's called demonic contract : a curl. Perhaps suggesting different kinds of contracts, which is something I feel like intuitively makes sense. As just an example, right, we presume that something similar has occurred with Gunko, the other god's knights, and the Gorosei, and they don't look quite as demonic as Dory and Brogy. If we're speculating that Emu's powers are related in some way to authority, being a ruler, then the nature of Emu's relationship to whoever they're contracted to could matter. Basically, I want a legitimate deal with the devil, where someone willingly gives up their own soul in return for strength, whatever. And I feel like with this condition, you could potentially make a stronger pact, because you have to acknowledge Mu as your king. But obviously, there is a lot that we do not know. A thought that I kind of had in passing, which I've already said to some degree, is the way that Dory and Brogy look right now reminds me a lot of ancient giants. I think that Oda had to know that when he designed it. Now, Oda's logic could be really simple, like he just wants Loki to end up fighting Dory and or Brogy, and they're the same size and there's now like similarities between them. I could imagine the panel being very epic. But I'm also halfway wondering whether or not Mu or somebody else with the same power made some sort of deal with the giants in the past. Look man, it's plot relevant and semi a Chekhov's gun that every single giant of Elbaph possesses at least some ancient giant blood. And it also seems like having more of this blood makes someone a better candidate to be the official king of Elbaph. For instance, Hyrule mother not having ancient giant blood was a big no-no, and he was essentially dismissed as a candidate to become the king of Elbaph. So I wonder if what's happening right now, Emu transforming Dory and Brogy, commanding them to announce themselves as the king of Elbaph, is something that happened over 800 years ago. Then naturally over time, this demon giant blood steadily diminished. Really, the only difference between ancient giants and Dory and Brogy right now are their wings. But there are some potential clues that ancient giants in the past might have had wings. Hyruden's mainsail depicts a dragon with wings with his helmet. In the mural, again, there is a dragon which appears to be ruling over the great tree in the center. And Loki has wing tattoos. So it's possible that ancient giants in the past had wings. Those genes were just lost. And honestly, this reveal makes you question the existence of the demon race to begin with. If Mu can make a pact with giants, it would seem likely that they have made pacts with humans in the past in a very similar way. Kaido, Magellan, Gecko Moria. We kind of assumed for the longest time that this was some kind of natural race to the world of One Piece. But it's possible that the demon race only exists because of the devil, and specifically Mu's abilities. Also worth pointing out that those speculated to belong to the demon race, or those that look like they belong to the demon race today, they often have horns, they often have sharp teeth, but they've also lost their wings, if their tribe ever had them to begin with. Frankly, I think that Magellan and the guards of Impel Down could be a big clue. I'm sure that there's gonna be some people that will say to me, nah, JB, Magellan had wings, but he actually didn't. They were fake wings that they wore for show. But it potentially foreshadows what once was there and was lost over time. But anyway, before I get lost, I had a point. In order for Emu to make a contract with Brogy, a blood seal was required. Blood was part of the ritual, which shouldn't come as a shock to anybody. Pretty standard stuff. So if ancient giants made some sort of similar deal in the past, having that ancient giant blood could matter. I like the thought that Dory and Brogy and all the other giants didn't get any say in the matter, potentially because their ancestors already made this deal and already proclaimed Mu as their king. Basically, the giants of Elbaph by blood are already servants of Emu. These are low-key people of Mu. I also like this because it would make somebody like Jaguar D. Saul special, because we know that Jaguar D. Saul comes from another giant village. He's not from Elbaph, meaning it is more likely that he does not possess even a single drop of ancient giant blood, which might end up giving him a special role in this arc. I also want to lay out another theory for you. We got some weird dialogue after Dory and Brogy had transformed. Suddenly, several other giants started to transform as well, and this time we don't see Emu involved in this at all, and we get a comment from another giant who's observing, huh, you guys too? Was it because they were caught between them? Like I said earlier, I think that Emu's powers relate to authority. And before the other giants transformed, they called Dory and Brogy chiefs. Dory and Brogy were their leaders. So I'm wondering whether this contract operates a lot like a disease. Except if your king or leader contracts it, and I guess you're near enough to them, you catch it as well. So I think that this would explain Emu's plan. He wants Dory and Brogy to proclaim themselves kings of Elbaph. After that, I would expect that the entire country would transform. The rule essentially would be that as of right now, those who do not believe or do not see Dory and Brogy as their king would not transform, which is why Elder Jarl's death is required. But yeah, guys, I feel pretty confident about what I'm about to speculate, and I just want to warn you guys, like, this is probably, in my opinion, very heavy spoiler warning for literally the rest of Elbaph. The Straw Hat crew dynamic is different. Luffy as captain is not captain in like the same authoritative way as you would normally see it. Every single member of the Strat crew is free, and they're a part of the crew for their own reasons. Luffy is not their king. So I don't actually think that this would happen, but if Mu were to transform Luffy, this same AoE effect would not apply to the crew. However, it might apply to members of the Strat Grand Fleet. And I think that it's very worthy of bringing up this fact right now, that Hyrule has pledged himself to serve Luffy. This isn't relevant because Mu is going to transform Luffy. I don't think that will happen. But it is relevant if Dory and Brogy successfully become the kings of Elbaph. If after that happens, the entire country, all the people there that have any ancient giant blood whatsoever, if all of them transform, Hyrule and his crew would be exceptions like Jaguar D. Saul. Speaking from the heart, man, I find this theory to be incredibly likely. It also potentially would not apply to a character like Loki, who is subservient of no other giant of Elbaph. I think that this idea also offers an incredible opportunity to how Elbaph will end, and how Luffy and crew will save all of the giants. If the giants come to believe that Luffy is Nika, that might make Luffy their king or their leader, usurping anybody else. Then from that point, Luffy would simply need to free them. No different than the dynamic between Luffy and his crew. Obviously, I'm talking about Luffy here, but I think you should also probably spare a thought for Loki, who probably also believes himself to be Nika and/or could potentially convince others that he is Nika. So don't forget about Mosa. Right now, we know that there's somebody, probably on Elbaph, secretly, who has a very high opinion of Loki. And my theory, since Mosa was essentially introduced, is that Mosa believes that Loki is Nika, which is why he's calling him and asking for advice. Mosa is literally convening with who they perceive to be God, i.e. their king or their ruler. They just do this secretly because it's taboo. You guys should also probably know by now that I think that Elder Jarl is Mosa. I'm very doubtful that this will actually matter too much in the story that is happening right now. Although you should open your mind to the possibility that there might be other giants like Mosa, especially if Mosa is not Elder Jarl, that do worship Loki, so they might be immune. We know that Dory and Brogy are not intending on converting Elder Jarl or transforming Elder Jarl, they plan to kill Elder Jarl. So him potentially worshiping Loki as his king shouldn't directly interrelate with what we think is going to happen. But to be honest with you, I do find it pretty likely that it interrelates with what has already happened. Guys, if you just look at Elder Jarl in this chapter, his general demeanor, the look in his eyes, there's no surprise there. There's no shock there. It's almost as if he's dealt with something like this before. I think that what is happening right now is almost verbatim the circumstances which led to King Harold's death. Think about it for a second. King Harold was the legitimate and recognized king of Elbaph, who it's highly suggested left the country and attempted to form bonds with the world government. I do not think that Emu intended to do all of this last minute. I think 14 years ago, he transformed King Harold, just the same as he has done with Dory and Brogy now. It's pointed out to us that there's some interesting damage in the castle, things which appear like claw marks, as if there was a beast in there. If these powers work as we have speculated, then after the king transformed, there would be an AoE effect transforming others that were near him, those who considered him their king. And importantly, it would not apply to those who did not consider Harold to be their king. So as we have speculated, Elder Jarl. This works incredibly well with the theory that Elder Jarl is Mosa and looked at Loki as being the true king of Elbaph. This belief could have spared him the same fate, and why Elder Jarl wouldn't have transformed. And of course, the only other character that would be spared would be Loki himself, who would have viewed himself as the true king of Elbaph and not Harold. I 100% think that this is the circumstances of King Harold's death, and the death of all of the other giants whose bodies still remain in the castle. King Harold was transformed by Mu. Those that perceived him as their king were then also transformed. The only ones that were spared were Jarl and Loki. Jarl and Loki literally soloed or duoed the entire castle, including King Harold. And they kept this a secret from the rest of Elbaph by forbidding entrance into the castle. So guys, prepare to cry. I'm feeling this one already. At the same time, I think that this theory aligns with how the community is beginning to perceive Loki, while at the same time elevating his character and adding even more intrigue. I mentioned earlier in this review that I think that Imu's plan with Elbaph is to rule it, make this his home base, make the entire race of giants his loyal warriors. With or without Mary Joie, I think that this thought makes a lot of sense. And the thing that we pretty much know about Loki is that he plans on destroying Elbaph. That's the great fear. You release Loki, Elbaph will be destroyed. And suddenly, I'm rooting for this. If Imu wants Elbaph that badly, it can't be that bad of an idea to destroy it. Maybe this is why Loki wants to destroy Elbaph. And this could also potentially explain why Loki may not want to become the king of Elbaph, if he understands his power at all. I really hope that you guys are following along, because the argument that we're making here makes the greatest danger facing the world kingship. Also, if this is true, holy hell, masterful storytelling. If all Imu needs to do is force the king of a country into a contract, transform them into a demon, then suddenly all of their subordinates transform as well, as like a domino disease-like effect, right? Kings become the most dangerous thing in the world. A very reasonable pathway for Imu to rule over the entire world. Makes you think about the Reverie a little bit differently, huh? For the past 800 years, Imu, the Celestial Dragons, and the Gorosei have been expanding the world government as much as physically possible in order for it to cover all of the islands of the world. All this while making sure that every single one of these islands has a leader or a king. The authority, unlike Elbaph currently, is clearly established, so that Imu can pop these islands one by one. And using his ability to possess his subordinates, effectively do all of this at the same exact time. Straight up, this feels like, to me, a plot worthy of waiting 800 years. At the very least, we've gone from 20 kings to hundreds of kings. Close the curtains. As far as Imu is concerned, this plan, he wins. And whether or not the Revolutionary Army realize this or know this or not, what they are doing at various islands across the country actually has value. They are literally saving people. And simultaneously, this would justify every ambition and every plot for any character in the story to become king of the world. It may be required to overthrow somebody like Imu or with Imu's abilities, especially if this has already happened at some point in the past. So I just want to throw this out here while we're here. Right now, Blackbeard possesses 2 devil fruits. There is a lot of speculation. I think most people believe that it is possible for Blackbeard to acquire a 3rd. Hypothetically, what do you think would happen if Blackbeard acquired Imu's devil fruit? Would he inherit this authority? And at the same time, I suppose we're also speculating that if Imu is not the original owner of this fruit, would they have inherited what prior users did as well? Just some food for thought. But yeah, whether this applies in Elbaph or not, I do think that this is the grand scheme importance of Oda making Luffy a god, and likely having the entire world worship him by the conclusion of the story. For the people to eventually be freed and released from their evil, they need to believe in Luffy. And I suppose you could phrase it in this way: accept him as their Lord and Savior. As a side note, recently I made a video discussing the death of Luffy, to which a lot of the comments absolutely are like, no way is that going to happen. But I feel like it's a pretty non-controversial thing to say right now, that regarding Luffy and Nika, Oda has absolutely been inspired by Jesus. And beyond the obvious parallels in Wano of Luffy dying and then being resurrected, there's all sorts of cross symbols in the story, including associated with Nika in Kuma's church, which is designed like a Catholic church. Mother Carmel, who likely taught the religion of Nika, is designed based on a nun. Jesus was the son of God, the sun. The Romans worshipped the sun god on December 25th, aka Christmas. Invictus Sol. Also Sol meaning sun, but soul sounding like soul, like Brook. By the way, you go to church on Sunday. This is also the winter solstice, when we know that the giants pray to the sun god. Look, you could say more. I don't feel the need. At this point, it is abundantly clear. If you don't believe, you either don't like this or are in denial. So, spoiler alert, at the end, Jesus dies. As they say, Jesus died for humanity's sins, allowing them to reconcile with God, achieve salvation and forgiveness. Which, based on what we have speculated here, would make a lot of sense if the vast majority of the world ends up becoming legitimate evil demons. Perhaps a lot of forgiveness is needed. I think the idea that Oda is trying to convey is that the vast majority of the world worship false gods, or perhaps the Antichrist. There should be no kings. Those who are subservient to kings are on one hand not free, and on the other hand worshiping a false god. These are men, they are people. They are not gods. The ones that you should be listening to do not believe in the rule of man. And not coincidentally in this story, do not obey the laws of the established order or of man. Luffy is a pirate. Anyway, I understand that a lot of people do not like this conversation, probably for religious reasons, but it is what it is. I personally think that low-key, Oda is deeply spiritual. The three most common religions in Japan are Shinto, which is the native ancient Japanese religion relating to, like Oni and spirits, yokai and nature, Buddhism and Christianity. It seems to me as if One Piece is blending all of these together, which may also be a thing in Japan. I have no idea. Although based on syncretism and actual history, this is likely. Anyway, to go back to my shadow theory, where we talked about potentially making a contract with the devil. The real idea of that theory was to argue that the things that make a deal with Imu lose their soul and become effectively shadow and body. And it's because of this nature why they are immortal and they cannot be killed. This theory is now pretty likely. You can just kind of look at what's happening in the panels in this chapter as Dorian Broggie and others are transforming into demons. Like, if Imu really does take their soul, and I should clarify this, when the spoilers came out and early translations came out, it was phrased in a way which made you think that Imu only took a portion of their soul. For instance, the way that OP Scans translated it is Imu says, in exchange for a fleeting span of life, thou shalt receive an immortal body and prodigious strength. So a fleeting span of life is conveyed as only a portion of their soul. So while I don't actually think that this is a mistranslation, I think that the people who read it are reading it wrong. And I personally vibe heavily with TCB's translation. Not just because it works with my theory, just because I literally think this to be the case. When Imu says a fleeting span of life, he is talking as an immortal being that is 1,000 years old. So a normal person's entire lifespan would be a fleeting span of life, at least as far as Imu is concerned. Perhaps we'll get even more clarity in the future. I'm curious how the official translation translates it. I wouldn't be surprised to see the same exact wording as OP Scans, the phrasing of a fleeting span of life. But I really think that Imu is taking somebody's entire soul, leaving behind a being very similar to a zombie. Its body and shadow. They are not dead because the soul is not returned to heaven or hell or whatever. It still exists within Imu's possession. Similar to how Moria needs the people whose shadow he's taken, he needs them to survive for him to retain control over the shadow, because the shadow can only exist while the soul still exists, although they do not have to be attached. It's just no longer owned by the person whose soul it is. But yeah, anyway, go watch that video. Another thing that I think is potentially worthy of pointing out is that as Dory and Brogy transform into demons, and you look at them visually, and you look at some of the elements of what's happening here, it reminds you a lot of Big Mom in Wano, where she consumed a bit, just a bit, of her own soul, and then she got larger, but more specifically, her eyes are doing the very same thing that Dory and Brogy's eyes are doing. So in my opinion, part of Imu's demonic contract, not only possessing the soul of the person, but then also allowing them to consume their own life force, similar to Big Mom, to gain strength. That is what I think is going on here, which in my mind would make it likely that Dory and Brogy, as well as all of the other giants, are much stronger than regular God's Knights. Also apparently much more disposable. I also happened to make a theory video recently that I think that something very similar is happening with Luffy when he is in Nika form. So I just want to remind you that Brogy said almost the exact same thing that Luffy says when he is transformed into Nika. He said, "I feel like I can do anything." I believe this to be foreshadowing that the source of Brogy's strength right now is the very same source as Nika, the power of a soul. I hate to say it, guys, but even if Luffy manages to free the giants in this arc, there is at least a possibility that they will all have significantly aged because of what is happening. Kind of like what's said about Mink Sulong, like if they transform all night, they can literally fight themselves to death. I think that the giants will lose quite a bit of lifespan. And this might also help justify another reason why Imu would prioritize capture of the giants. Because they live so long, because they have so much more lifespan or life force than every other race. That would inherently make them more powerful subordinates, utilizing this ability. But yeah, I said this a really long time ago, but I'm pretty well convinced that very soon Imu is going to leave Gunko's body and return to Marijois. I just have a really strong feeling that although Imu seems essentially invincible right now, and on another tier entirely, there are some limits to his abilities. But basically, nearly everything in this chapter can be interpreted as Imu laying the groundwork for other people to take control, and for his presence to no longer be required. I keep saying his, and I make this mistake literally every time I try to talk about Imu, but just fill in the gaps for me. Guys, I'm personally of the opinion that Imu could be a woman, so I mean to say they every time for that reason. Sorry about the constant slip-ups. So look guys, pure logic here, but if Imu had the ability to literally turn every giant in Elbaph to a demon, I feel like they would. I feel like if there was no downsides to doing that, and that was simply possible, that is very obviously what they should do, because why not? So what is actually happening is Imu was very specific about who they wanted to specifically transform. And then after that, as I've speculated, it's like a domino effect based on authority. It's happening passively. So again, pure logic, why would you need to kill Elder Jarl if you could transform him? It's for this reason that I think that Imu can't. This is what they were able to accomplish today. And it may also possibly be related to Dory and Brogy resisting their control. To go back to my grand conspiracy or plot for Imu, right, their ultimate objective is to utilize the world's government in order to transform the entire world into demons. There's potentially purpose in having evil kings that are likely to submit to you more readily, i.e. people with less strong wills than Dory and Brogy, who do not need to be as encouraged to sign the contract. Anyway, another thing that you can question is, well, Imu is sending Dory and Brogy to go kill Elder Jarl, but why not assist them more? Why not do it yourself? Why not subjugate the entire country of Elbaph on your own? Again, I think it's because Imu can't. If willpower interferes with their strength, right, then that might also apply to somebody like Gunko, who they are currently possessing. Long story short is I think that Imu is already stretched thin and never really wanted to involve themselves in this to begin with. So I do think that Imu is going to disappear from this arc, or at least assume a primary non-combat role. Maybe you can think about Enel in Skypiea, right? Like Enel set up this death game and for the most part just wanted to observe it as the people whittled themselves down. But the difference is that Enel did this because he wanted to do it, whereas I believe that Emu is forced to. I think that this is also why Emu made a point to command Summers to regain control of the kids. And he also seemingly encouraged Killingham to, step your game up. They are both still required. And with Summers and the children, this is particularly noteworthy. Like, if your virus just spreads across Elbaph and everyone immediately becomes your subordinate, then why would the children even matter anymore? Wouldn't they also transform into demons and then you are their leader? But no, they seem to still want these hostages for some reason. So the way that I choose to understand this right now has everything to do with how Emu acquired Dory and Brogy's soul. Potentially also Gunko as well. The difference between someone willingly giving their soul and it being taken by force. Perhaps that limits the sustainability of this attack, giving it a kind of time limit that potentially would not apply in different circumstances. Again, this could be a genius way to explain Emu's inaction in Elbaph over the last 14 years. It potentially took some time in unique circumstances to get King Harold under his control. Maybe King Harold was manipulated to willingly give his soul, and that matters. So not only has Emu been waiting for a new king to rule over Elbaph, but they've also been waiting for the right circumstances to accomplish this more effectively, which never arose. Desperate times calls for desperate measures. Here we are. But I want you to keep this in mind because it is incredibly likely that Emu uses this ability at some other point in the future of the story. Like, Emu is probably not going down in Elbaph. Strong feeling about that, okay? So we're gonna see this again, but the circumstances of facing this, like elsewhere, may be different than Elbaph. At the very least, that would be the smart way to write this. Emu uses his power again, but the difficulty of facing it has escalated. And at the same time, we may not realize it now, but we may realize it eventually. Oda has greatly rewarded Elder Jarl and potentially Loki's sacrifice, and everything that they accomplished for the island of Elbaph secretly. If that theory is true, of course. I think that it is, but yeah, still technically just a theory. But anyway, guys, 46 minutes into it, almost 47. Yeah, this chapter was pretty good. I think the only thing that I didn't talk about was Robin. So I'm just gonna throw it in here now. What Robin is doing in her mentality and desperation is exciting me, and I'm feeling that emotion. Also, I cannot wait for Luffy to finally get here, because good lord, he is needed. But yeah, I suppose it goes without saying, 10 out of 10 chapter, 11 out of 10 chapter. I'm actually going to buy the physical copy of this volume from Jump just to have in my collection, because for me, this chapter is a milestone in the story. As always, I'm curious as to what everyone else thinks, whether you noticed something from the chapter that I might have missed. Just share your thoughts. If you're interested, check out my book, The Booms. Link is in the description. Like the video, subscribe, click the bell to be notified, join the squad. And as always, guys, have a wonderful day.